Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Ruby Live event. Today we have our chef office hours. I'm joined by Chef Rick Moonen, and these office hours are really designed to answer the questions that you have for us. So they're very much an open or a kind of a fluid format that we have here. It was really designed to have the two of us address your concerns, your needs all around cooking. So anything related to food ingredients or cooking techniques, really anything about the process of cooking, how to select ingredients, how to cook seasonally, all those things would be fair game for this live event today. So if this is your first live event and you've never joined us before, all you have to do to ask a question is type in the question box, which is just to the top right of where I'm speaking. So you can type in your question, click the black box to add the question to a moderation queue. That's what puts it for a quick review, and then we post it. So when you see a question that you like posted, you can click the heart, and that heart right next to the question will just raise it up a little bit so we get to it just a little bit faster. But without further ado, we will just jump into some of the questions here. First question, what is the best way to clean and store mushrooms? Rinse off with water, brush off dirt. If they're not raised organically, would only brushing them be adequate? Rick, I'm going to pass this one to you just to get this kicked off, talking about some mushrooms here.
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure. I love mushrooms. One of my favorite foods. Mushrooms are like sponges, so they want to absorb water. And you don't want water normally when you're cooking a mushroom. Normally, you want some browning, caramelization, Maillard reaction, the flavor that develops, the sweetness and the earthiness comes out. So I discourage washing, but if necessary, I brush them. I brush most of my mushrooms. I mean, something like a morel mushroom that might have sand embedded in it, you have to wash them. You put your mushrooms in whole. Don't cut them first. Then you agitate them, take them out with your fingers so that the dirt stays in the water, and you put them in something to dry them. To me, that's the best way to handle mushrooms. And you get the most flavor out of them. Some mushrooms I don't touch at all. Especially if they look clean, they're good. Trim the stems, make stock out of the stems, and enjoy the rest. I mean, that's generally how I work with the mushrooms. Keeping water, I use water only when necessary, and I keep it intact as short a period of time as possible. There you go, James.
Yeah, awesome. I'm also a huge mushroom fan. I would agree about those morel mushrooms. Morels have a tendency to, sometimes hold sand or pine needles and things can get in there. So every time I work with morels and I give them that kind of quick wash and the agitation, I'm always so surprised how much especially those pine needles floating around. Makes me think about how many dirty mushrooms we've all eaten at different restaurants and things. But the last comment that you made, Rick, I just want to reinforce that in terms of the process of getting the mushrooms out of that water, because I've seen it so many times where people are agitating or washing the mushrooms and then just dump it through a colander, essentially just putting all those little bits and pieces right back onto the mushrooms. So the action of kind of lifting it out is going to be important so that everything else stays submerged in that water. Really, really key here. In Oregon, we obviously have tons of different mushrooms here, and foraging is a big thing. And I also agree about the comment in terms of not overhandling or overwashing them. So if there's a really beautiful, pristine mushroom and it just has a little bit of dirt on it or whatever else, just a paper towel or just a little bit of a brush off is all you need. I actually don't mind having some of the flavor of the forest. It's just you don't want any big clump or anything like that. Certainly not. Next question here is about low sodium soy sauce. So Gerald is asking, since even low sodium soy sauce is loaded with sodium, how might one get the interesting Asian flavor without using soy sauce? What are some healthier alternatives? So I would say that, in the case of building a flavor base, if you're looking for flavors that are reminiscent of the cuisines of Asia, soy sauce is a very, very important staple flavoring agent, condiment. I would say that using a low sodium soy sauce is better than a full strength or regular soy sauce from the sodium perspective. They're going to have different flavor profiles, of course. Many of the sauces and condiments used in Asian cuisines have a salt, kind of a certain salt content, because it's used for preservation, it's used for flavoring, it's used in some cases in the fermentation process for reducing the risk of spoilage or creating a really round umami type flavor. So I wouldn't eliminate soy sauce altogether. I would still use it, Gerald, but maybe very, very sparingly, or in more of a topical application. So in other words, finishing with soy sauce the way you might finish with just a little bit of salt in an otherwise, sort of low seasoned type dish. Regular soy sauce is pretty salty, right? So I think, my recollection is that a serving of soy sauce, regular soy sauce, is about a tablespoon, and it's going to be roughly a quarter or a third of your sodium for the day. So I don't want to diminish that, but I think for a lot of people, that's going to be the major, saline, the major amount of salt coming from their food, and using it wisely and using it so that you get that topical, effect with your mouth is going to be kind of one of the most important things. So, in terms of healthier alternatives, certainly there are lots of other flavorful ingredients that you could use to build your various dishes within Asian cuisine. So anything essentially that just comes out of that fresh food category, so herbs, the integrity of the vegetables and the ingredients that you're using, those are going to be really, really important. Things like garlic and ginger and shallots and scallions and garlic chives and all kinds of other allium family are going to be really important as well, and those are going to be great for building flavor. But otherwise, I would just say, just start by not eliminating it, but maybe just reducing it, and then finding some other ways to build flavor. Next question here. Please talk about roasting vegetables without oil. Great question, Carolyn. Before I talk about the oil-free or the dry roasting technique, I just want to quickly review the kind of classic or conventional technique around roasting. And that is really a technique that uses dry heat to have that extractive kind of concentrated flavor, right? So you're applying heat. You typically would coat your vegetables in a small amount of oil, and you'd get them roasting at a high temperature. No oil roasting is very, very similar. The differences are that instead of using oil, you might want to use a reduced or flavorful liquid to just provide a very, very small amount of surface liquid, which can be used to help adherence, herbs and spices potentially, or just to create the context, the room, so that those vegetables can actually have some coloration, some development of color as they're roasting. So one example might be some reduced, maybe apple cider mixed with some apple cider vinegar. That reduced down to a few tablespoons tossed with your vegetables before roasting would certainly accelerate the amount of coloration that you might get on those vegetables because of those surface sugars. So in addition to that treatment, you're going to also want to think about temperature. Typically, no oil roasting requires a higher temperature and smaller knife cuts. So I typically, when I'm doing no oil roasting, stay away from really big knife cuts, because those have a tendency to dry out and become leathery on the outside before the inside is soft. So smaller knife cuts, smaller cuts create nice exterior and still have a soft interior. I would just say, give it a try. It's just one of those things where you want to build flavor in other ways. Just want to maybe pass to Rick and ask the question to see what other things would you say are good from a flavorful, additions without adding oil. So things you might add to roasted vegetables, maybe even after roasting. Any ideas there?
Vegetables, thanks, Ken. The vegetables are beautiful on their own, first of all, and they all have moisture in them, inherent in them. What I do when I'm roasting vegetables is I don't peel them, I wash them. Not everything. Like I'll throw whole shallots unpeeled into a low oven, and without anything other than I'll take a cast iron pan and I'll just put it in when I have a pizza party, a pizza oven. So when I'm done with it and everything is still some residual heat overnight because it's stuck in the wall, I'll put a bunch of vegetables in there, and the next day they are so sweet, so tender, so unbelievable that you don't have to do a thing to them. Now, when you're adding liquids like you're talking, Ken, it's brilliant, because it reduces and becomes a glaze. The sugars in the vegetables will come out. It'll intermingle with the liquid that you might add. It turns into a glaze that you can roll around and comes out nice and shiny. But just roasting things without touching them, so other than washing them if they're root vegetables, etc., they come out spectacular. And you wonder why you haven't done that before, So it's sometimes getting out of its way and just allowing it to be what it wants to be is really the best way to celebrate the natural flavors and the intensity of flavors. If you just take apple cider, for instance, just straight up apple cider, pressed apples from down the block, you get a gallon of it and you reduce it down to a syrup. The acidity and the sweetness becomes this unbelievable harmonious syrup that you can use in diabetic recipes, etc. And it's become a main staple for me. So sometimes, and I hate to just be the simplistic guy. I'd like to make it more complicated, but sometimes you just got to get out of its way. So I think all these are great suggestions, Ken, on your side for sure. I'm just thinking sometimes just leave them alone.
I love that. Yeah, let the vegetable do its own work for itself. The glaze idea is also really amazing. I think that it has so much utility outside of that one application, and thinking about it as a way to extend flavor and draw bigger flavor and to create that acidic backbone but still some residual sweetness is awesome. Next question here: are there any healthy substitutes for eggs? So, Gerald, when you're thinking about egg substitutions, there's really a few different directions you can take. Obviously the egg as a product really has a functionality that is very unique because of the protein and the fats and the way, the egg is composed. It has a lot of incredible functionality. So when you're looking to substitute eggs or replace eggs, you have to ask yourself, well, what is it that we're replacing? What is it that we're trying to do in this recipe or in this dish that the eggs would otherwise do? How do we do that? And it really depends on the recipe. So if you're making like, a breakfast scramble and you want to do it egg-free, you would apply a different ingredient. You would use tofu or some other, similar product versus the way you'd substitute eggs in a baked good. And you might substitute eggs in a baked good for, by using starch or some gelled chia seeds or some gelled flax seeds or something similar. So it really comes down to what is the function that you're trying to replicate with those eggs. For things like aeration and leavening and so on in baked goods, it's a lot easier of a substitution. But when you're using eggs as a standalone ingredient, as a filling, as a scramble, these sorts of things, then you have to be a lot more creative and find substitutes that are going to resemble the texture, the flavor, the color, all those other things. And that's where something like a tofu scramble can possibly come in. So hopefully, Gerald, that helps you there. Gerald also asked about roasting without oil. Hopefully, Gerald, my explanation and the input from Rick was enough information. But I would say that, just to reinforce Rick's point, that the ingredient selection, finding the best products to start with and letting them do their own work is a really, really good philosophy to follow in terms of, that equation around flavor and your technique. Hi, Chef. What would you suggest using as an egg replacer for making super soft bread? I would say that if you're trying to make a soft bread, you probably don't need any egg replacer at all. I would say it's really more a matter of your flour selection and your hydration and, essentially the type of dough that you're working with. So if you want to have a soft bread, sometimes that can be enriched. And typically that could be adding some fat into that. You can also think about enriching from the perspective of, adding other flavors and some other flavor dynamics, which could make kind of a more interesting loaf of bread. But otherwise, if you're just looking for soft, supple bread, I would just look at flour selection and hydration. Next question, I'm going to pass to Rick. I'm going to go ahead and read it though. Do I need to worry about smoke points? If yes, what fat has the highest smoke points? So Rick, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. Hey, Rubin, okay, there's a lot of different fats you can pick from. And smoke point is not normally something that you want to accomplish. It breaks down the fat. If you were to take an extra virgin olive oil and put it into a pan and then bring it up to heat, you've already taken away a lot of the beneficial factors that olive oil was going to bring, including flavor. So when I need something that's high temp, I like grapeseed oil a lot, actually, to be honest with you. It seems to have a very high smoking point. It's great for searing. It's totally neutral. I'm going to sound like a proponent of it because it has so many benefits. I mean, you can make a vinaigrette with grapeseed oil and put it in your refrigerator, and you don't have to thaw it out. Like how like olive oil will thicken up. Grapeseed oil does not. So that is definitely seed oils are good. A choice, I think, when selecting your oil type. And as far as smoking point, whenever oil is smoking, to me, that's not a good thing. I like to fight against it because I want to retain whatever ingredients are inherent in that particular oil. It could be pumpkin seed oil, whatever it could possibly be. You don't want it to smoke because once you've gotten to that point, nothing good's going to come of it. And so that's general. I mean, there are particular points when you're searing and you want super hot. I always preheat my pan dry. And, in the case like that, where I really want that kind of drive heat sear, I'm usually picking a very thick, cast iron, heavier pot, that I do that. I dry heat it. So, and a lot of times when I'm cooking things like peppers and I want to char them and I want to cook them, I'll cut my peppers up and I'll put them right into a preheated, screaming hot cast iron with no oil whatsoever. Let them hang for a second. Do that with eggplant as well, because eggplant just drinks all the oil up anyway. Add your oil afterwards, and then you see what happens. You get smoke. You get that's when you want the smokiness, because I want the flavor of the smokiness. But as far as preheating oil to the smoking point, I'm not a big fan. I don't know what you're thinking, Ken, but that's my experience.
Yeah, I would agree. I think once you get your oil to the point where it's smoking, you're past the utility of that oil in many ways. But if you're searing, or if you're really just trying to get the pan super hot and you add a small amount of oil and you get that little waft of smoke and you add your food, that's fine. I wouldn't get that pan so hot and add your oil and let it just smoke and smoke and smoke, because what comes after the smoke point is the flash point, where you can actually get the pan to set on fire, and then all bets are off, right? So when you get to a smoke point, though, to Rick's point, you're getting the breakdown of the oil. So something like a grapeseed oil, other neutral oils, avocado oil, you're not going to have a degradation of flavor necessarily. You can have the addition of some off flavors, but something like a really good olive oil, you're going to basically, as you bring it up to temperature, while you still have some utility, you're going to be really shifting the flavor of that oil. So I think overall, it's good to think about what are those oils that you could use at lower temperatures, or oils that you use cold to finish, versus what are those oils that have a high smoke point that you use as a utility. But I think peanut oil, grapeseed oil, avocado oil, while they're all very refined, they definitely suit the need in terms of smoke point. But they're also neutral oils. It looks like we answered some of Rubin's questions here. What about clarified butter? So, Rick, what are your thoughts on clarified butter or ghee?
I love clarified butter as a flavoring agent. I mean, most of my career I've been typecasted into the seafood category. So, I mean, clarified butter and I are old buds. Or ghee. You can buy ghee. You don't have to make your own clarified butter as well. I mean, it works wonders. You can make a hollandaise with ghee, and it's perfectly beautiful. I have. So as far as clarified butter for smoking point discussion, no, I don't want to bring clarified butter to that point ever. But as far as flavor, it's hard to recreate that um, butterscotch. It's hard to describe butter without saying butter. I don't think a Pictionary I'd win on that one. I'd probably get buzzed out. But it is like unmistakable mouthfeel, flavor, vanilla, and nuttiness that you don't get from other oils. So our game is pretty good, but that's a whole nother story. But clarified butter, huge fan. Fish and well, not just fish. You can sear filet mignon in clarified butter as well. It's what we. It was the only thing we used. It was the only oil cooking medium that we used in La Côte Basque in 1979 when we opened up. So I learned on clarified butter. I mean, that's my buddy. I mean, we used to get vats of butter just melting away, skimming off the butter solids on the top, and just straining it. And the food was great. It still is great, but we've evolved. So clarified butter has a soft place in my heart. But there's a lot of great options out there that are also amazing. I have a vast amount of oils in my pantry and my palette of things to choose from, and I still learn every single day. And I've been doing it for 45 years. So knock yourselves out, have fun with it. But clarified butter, keep it close. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I would just add to that it's got a definite flavor profile, right? So a lot of the oils that we've talked about are more neutral in flavor, but butter, to Rick's point, has that depth, that nuttiness, that component that you don't get from those other oils, but does have a higher smoke point because it's clarified. It doesn't have the solids or the water. Butter has a fair amount of water typically in it, so you want to evaporate that off and pull the solids out, and then you just are left with the fat, right? The actual just oil part of that product. Next question here from Natasha. When making desserts, the recipes usually tend to be using loads of sugar. Is it possible to use less sugar? And depending on what you were making, will it affect what you were making? I try to get healthier options, but still enjoy desserts. So, Natasha, it again depends on what type of dessert you're working on. So in some cases, the sugar does have a functional component. It's cooking to a certain temperature, and because it's cooking to that temperature, it's becoming more brittle, or it's helping to bind things together, or making a syrup and holding things together. Or in the cases of certain recipes, you need the sugar to help just with the overall flavor balance of that dessert. It's something very sweet. If you have some dark chocolate or bittersweet chocolate, the sugar is going to help balance those flavors out, or maybe even enhance the flavors of a baked good that has fruit in it or things like that. So it really just depends on what it is you're baking and what part of the formula you're working on taking sugar out of. I would say if you're looking to substitute refined white sugar with other sweeteners, there's lots and lots of options. So if the issue is you don't want the refined sugar, there are other directions you can take. You can go in one direction, which is kind of a shade below the sugar, which could be like a maple sugar or something else similar. So still very much a simple sugar. You can also go the direction of, and just really, again, depends on the recipe, you can go in the direction of using what we call at Rouxbe a whole food plant-based fruit sweetener, which is essentially like a dehydrated fruit that you can rehydrate and then puree. So if you took dried apples or dried apricot or dried mango or dates, because they have so much natural sugar in themselves, you can rehydrate those, you can blend them into a paste, and those pastes can be used to add sweetness to desserts. In fact, in our Essential Vegan Desserts course, we have a number of recipes that utilize fruit paste as the primary sweetener. So hopefully that also asks your other question about sugar-free options that are not artificial. So yeah, Natasha, I would say fruit pastes are going to be your way to go if you don't want to use a refined sugar product, but still want something sweet. Next question is for Rick. One of my favorite restaurants was RM Seafood in Vegas. Realizing this is a big question, would you mind speaking a bit about your general process for conceptualizing and developing a dish for a restaurant like RM Seafood from Sunny? Great question.
Huh. I love that question. It's easy. You know, it's funny. I don't really think about what's the next thing. I just search out what's available. I look at I talk to my purveyors. That's where I start the inspiration for a new dish on a menu such as RM Seafood. I mean, putting together the concept in the beginning was easy and fun for me. You know, I just went to a bunch of different places that I respected, and I took away with what did I really love about that? What attracted me to that? And I put that down on a notepad, and then I conceptualized my restaurant around the things that I liked about other places. So it's real simple. I mean, we're always sharing with each other in this industry to begin with. But back to the dish, you know, okay, so what's up? What do you got today? What's new? Oh, rockfish. What's rockfish? You know, I'm not familiar with rockfish. Rockfish where I'm from New York. Rockfish is a name for striped bass. You know, they call it at the Fulton Fish Market. But when you go out on the West Coast, they got all these rockfish. And well, why are we talking about rockfish? Well, because for a long time, rockfish was really in the endangered area where you should kind of leave it alone. Well, we left it alone, and now we got rockfish again. You should try it. It's amazing. It's available right now. So I get some rockfish and I just start sauteing it. What's it kind of reminded me of? What does it want? You know, and then what ingredients are available right now also that might enhance that? We all know that acidic things go great with a seafood item. You want some acid. You wouldn't think about twice about not about squeezing a lemon on there because that's what you put on fish. So what else has acid? Oh, rhubarb. It's springtime. Let's do something with rhubarb. What else might go with rhubarb? You know, and then you just evolve from there. How do you want your dish to become? And so, I mean, that's general, you know, how I'll come up with a conceptualization of a dish. But I believe that every dish should have a story behind it. The same story I just gave you. The reason why I came up with this dish is because this is how I thought. I like this fish with capers usually, but I'm tired of capers. What else is salty? Makes my mouth feel like, you know, olives. Okay, great. You know, I'm making you know, okay. Well, lately I got a vacuum seal machine at home, and I've been taking all kinds of vegetables and fruits and stuff, and doing lacto fermentation with it. You know, just so you take 2% of salt and you seal it and you let it set. It gets this salty, deep, rich. I have so many different caper sources now. Categorically caper sources because I dry the fruits and vegetables after I extract the juices, and it's been a blast. You know, so I don't know how experimental you might be, but I mean, during the pandemic, I had nothing but time to play around with everything. So I try to educate myself every single day, and you know, so there's just another facet to my capability of enhancing a concept that I can come up with. So long answer, I guess, but you know, it's the mind of the chef. You know, where do you go? I go straight to the refrigerator or to my purveyor or to the store. That's where it begins, and where it ends is your own story.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. Next,
Sure.
Next question we have here. See about the forks over knives diet. When relating to the forks over knives diet, why does it always reference tofu and tempeh as to be used sparingly? Is it because it's processed or something more? So, yeah, Carrie, that's a great question. We get that question from time to time, in particular about the forks over knives course. I would say that the forks over knives philosophy, given that it's a whole food, plant-based framework, definitely prioritizes any foods that are unprocessed. And even though tofu and tempeh are minimally processed, they still, in the mind's eye of forks over knives, that philosophy still fall into that, somewhat processed category. So that's the rationale for why there's a recommendation to use those more sparingly. I will say that, for people who have ever made their own tofu or their own tempeh, and these are both foods that have been made for many hundreds of years, before we had modern food processing equipment. These are both things that you can do in a fairly, minimal kitchen with some very basic ingredients. So while they are processed foods, I wouldn't at all in any way put them in the same category as meat alternatives, whether it's like Impossible or Beyond, or really anything that's coming, out of one of those types of facilities that is, trying to be a meat analog. It's just a much, much different level of processing and those sorts of things versus a tofu or a tempeh type product. So hopefully that's helpful for you, Carrie. I happen to be a big fan of both those products. I use them for lots of different things in terms of fillings and main course, and other ways to build nutrient dense plant-based foods into my diet. Next question: how do you store mushrooms? From Dawn. Rick, I'll let you take that one.
Okay. Well, mushrooms, there's all different mushrooms and different moisture levels. You're always fighting against it softening, getting slimy. I mean, no nicer way to put it. There's probably a very scientific name to that, but soft and slimy, bad. Hard and firm and closed tops are usually the mushroom that you're looking for, but whether it's a portobello, a white capped mushroom, and then there's other mushrooms that are almost bulletproof, like oyster mushrooms that they can freeze them and they can thaw them out and still grill them, and they're amazing. You wouldn't even know they got frozen because it happens in nature a lot on where they grow. All right, so now we've got all different kinds of mushrooms. How do you store them? In general, you want to let them breathe. There's got to be some air exchange so that it doesn't steam on it with its own, steam. In a refrigerator, it's not steaming, but there's evaporation of its own moisture that allows the exterior of the mushroom to start to deteriorate to that slimy factor. So put them in containers that, usually the containers they come in, if you're buying small amounts or even large amounts. If you buy mushrooms in a commercial environment, if that's not where you're from, you get these big boxes, and the boxes can breathe. It allows for moisture exchange, natural moisture exchange to happen. I mean, you can't hold mushrooms for 2 weeks and expect them to be perfect, but give them a chance to breathe. Keep it cool, and wash them if you're going to wash them last minute. Don't wash them and then store them. You're just adding more liquid to the situation, which is that's the battle in maintaining storage of a mushroom in general. So you don't have to put them under hay or anything. Just keep them in the boxes or containers. If you're going to transfer them, make sure there's some air exchange. That's the best I can say.
Awesome, beautiful. Next question from Sharon here. She's looking for some interesting menus for dinners for two. All out of ideas and running out of steam on vegan eating. So Sharon, I think it's the time when you're getting into the warmer months now to reinvigorate your your palate a little bit, and maybe think about some new foods that you haven't had during the colder months. So certainly, in terms of ideas, one thing that I like to do is, go online, look at some of the new cookbooks coming out. Just do a search for the sorts of foods that you're looking for, or even just do a search for foods based on the ingredients that you have. So if there's certain ingredients that you're really loving right now, maybe you have amazing salad greens coming out, or you have asparagus, or you have some other really great springtime vegetables, think about that maybe being the basis of some of the foods that you want to make. But otherwise, I would say in terms of getting out of the rut, finding inspiration, looking outside in to see what is it I really want to do, what do I want to accomplish with this activity of cooking. Do I want to learn something new? Do I want to push my boundaries? Do I want to taste something completely different? Do I want to go very spicy? Do I want to be very nuanced? Those are all things that can maybe help guide a bit what approach you're taking. Otherwise, I would say, just if you're feeding your spouse, see what, kinds of foods that person would like. It could be really, maybe up to that person to help design or delineate the sorts of things that they're wanting to eat. So that's always good too. Rick, do you want to add anything to that in terms of inspiration?
Sure, absolutely, Sharon. Not only do you want to get vegetables and fruits that are in season. I mean, right now you're losing your mind over stone fruits. There's plums and apricots and peaches and everything is all over the place. I don't know how you normally cook, but I mean, fire up your grill, burn some char wood, some real wood, and start roasting your vegetables and fruits over those. Try the differences can be outstanding and invigorate or inspire you to go down a different road. I just say take different try to experiment with a cooking preparation that you haven't tried before, and all of a sudden the door opens up and the things that you used to make, the same vegetables that you used to do a different way, are now completely different and extremely interesting. So take a walk on the wild side when it comes to cooking techniques is what I tell you to do.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, I couldn't agree more about the idea of putting those veggies on the grill, getting some additional flavor development from them that way. That's amazing. Next question from Jennifer here. Can I use my cast iron skillet to cook if I'm not using oil? If so, how? So Jennifer, I would say, you can absolutely still use cast iron, even if you're cooking without oil. The one thing I would do that requires oil is I would still season your cast iron pan properly. And seasoning requires oil. Essentially what you're doing is you're creating kind of a non-stick surface, this patina on the outside of the surface. And that's going to just help maintain the quality of the pan. It's going to help with your cooking outcomes. But the way you get a cast iron pan ready is by, quote, seasoning it. And essentially what you do is you just rub oil in it. And, either on top of the stove or even better inside the oven, cook that a series of times, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And, let it sit in there with the oil for an hour and then turn off the oven and let it completely cool. And do that a handful of times. That's going to really help develop an exterior on your cast iron pan that'll make it a lot easier to cook and clean up without adding additional oil. But the way I like to use my cast iron pan, without oil is for some of my roasted vegetables. So your no oil or dry roasted vegetables in a cast iron pan, see exceptional results because the pan retains and holds so much heat, and also creates a really nice sense of conduction because you have contact and you have really stable heat. Those types of pans, because they're so heavy, are not going to fluctuate. So you're going to have nice even coloration, even texture, even. So certainly I would say you can use it. There's certain things that aren't going to work as well in a cast iron pan compared to maybe like a stainless steel pan. But for everyone, it's a little bit different. It also really depends on the pan itself, how well seasoned it is, how old it is, what the surface texture of that pan feels like. I've got one cast iron pan that is about 85 years old, and the surface of that is just very, very smooth. It's been worn down and basically just has a much different texture than some of the other cast iron pans that I have. So hopefully that's useful, Jennifer. We're always happy to help with more questions if it's if you need some more help there. Next question is, air frying yield a similar result to deep frying? So Rubin, I would say the short answer is yes, you can achieve very similar results. But of course, there's lots of variation and factors that would determine how successful you are. So the first thing is really making sure that you're not crowding the air fryer, that you have a lot of circulation, that the heat in the air fryer is really able to activate and do that work. An air fryer that's just overloaded is going to be very, very disappointing. So certainly you can achieve, crispy, crunchy type vegetables using the air fryer. Nothing, of course, does exactly what deep frying does because of the nature of that technique. But if you're trying to approximate and, have crispy, crunchy type foods with a breading on the outside or not, the air fryer is a really good tool. Question for both Ken and Rick: what books have taught you the most about cooking or influenced your style the most? Question from Jonathan. Rick, I'll let you take that one first. I got to think about it for a second.
Sure. All right. Books. My goodness. Jonathan, when I went to culinary school in the 70s, the first book I bought when I was at school, and I remember it distinctly because I didn't have much money, it was Jacques Pepin's La Technique, because it was all photographs of how to break down a chicken, how to fillet a fish, how to building blocks. You know, there weren't real recipes out of there that I grabbed and became part of the fiber that describes my cuisine. Books and classic cuisine, that's, because I'm going back, early, 70s, 80s, So I bought Le Repertoire de la Cuisine, which is a book about all the old sauces and the garnishes that go with them and the names that went along with them. Food, as it was being developed, had names. So you knew that if you had an omelet princess, you were going to get asparagus, and et cetera, et cetera. There was, there was names to dishes, not just descriptors. So that was a foundation, a building block to my book selections. Ken, what books were you growing up with? What was your go-to? I'm just trying to jog my own
Yeah.
mind here.
Oh gosh, I was that geeky kid who collected cookbooks instead of comic books, Rick. So it didn't make me super popular back then, but it did give me a head start on my cookbook collection that I still have. I would say a really influential book for me, actually a book I got for my bar mitzvah when I was 13, is the Larousse Gastronomique,
Yep.
which is a enormous, like 1,000-page, almost like encyclopedia style book about food. And I remember as a young person opening up that Gastronomique and being just absolutely blown away by the images of foods, ingredients, dishes they had never, even in my wildest dreams, thought of, right? I couldn't even conceptualize. And the edition that I have of the Gastronomique was one that was probably photographed or produced in the early 70s. So you can only imagine the style of cuisine and even the aesthetics of the photography. So it's certainly very dated looking. And I even knew as a young person it was dated, but it had this historical kind of feel to it. But Larousse Gastronomique for me was a book that introduced very early ideas of the story of food, the history of food, where dishes come from, how they originated. So that would be one big book, Rick. I would say I still have my original copy going back over 30 years now. And it's a really important book. The other book I would say that really influenced me is a book called On Food and Cooking by Harold McGee. It's not a cookbook, but it is an important reference book. It's a book that I think for me as a teenager completely opened up my eyes to the science, the chemistry, more of the history. But more than anything, I love the way that book was written. I've read it cover to cover a few times. I've used it as a reference. And
the black or the red?
It was, yeah, both. It's just one of those books that I think you walk into a lot of kitchens, Rick, you see it on the shelf because it answers questions. Yeah. And for a long time in the 80s and 90s, there was nothing else like it. There just wasn't any other resource. We didn't have the internet. We couldn't go into that space.
Yeah, Ken, that book, Harold McGee's book on food and cooking changed the way that we approached food science, really. I mean, the thing was, we were trained in classic kitchens. This is how you make it. You didn't question it. That's just the way it's done. There really wasn't much explanation behind, cell breakdown, proper temperatures, and how maintaining moisture. You just seared meat, you roasted meat, or you braised it. And that's the way you did it. You didn't ask questions, and on to the next thing. Where Harold McGee would take a lot of the old, techniques and debunk them. He really said, actually, we're doing this wrong, folks. In sous vide cooking and other things, opened up many, 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 many doors. That was really a groundbreaking, life-changing experience for me, as well as thousands and thousands and thousands. I could say millions. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one of those books that I think really changed the course of food books. And, it was supported, I think, in large part by the fact that Harold, as a human, is incredibly compassionate and giving and warm, and has always been a person, in my experience at least, that has been very open and very much humble in terms of his approach. So he never, made any claims or things that he wasn't afraid to go back and reevaluate. He was always very interested in correcting his books and updating his books and getting the best information. So it was never about ego. It was always about science and outcomes. And he just has such a great way of explaining the process. And he's been an amazing bridge between the world of food writing and the science side, to your point, Rick, but also I think just elevating cuisine more generally. Making it more serious, making it something that people feel like you can dive into, right?
He gave us an insight into what's really going on in the oven, on the stove, on the grill, all around, and where your food's coming from, and how to appreciate it. And it just goes on and on and on. The man's tremendous.
Yeah.
I think the love fest is over. Let's move on.
Great stuff. Next question here. Hi, Ken and Rick. Have you noticed any trends of plant-based restaurants going oil-free with their entire menu? Wow, good question. I can't think of any restaurant that I know, at least not in Portland, that has a 100% whole food plant-based, meaning no oil on the menu. There are a few raw restaurants and some other restaurants and even pop-ups and things that maybe it's 90% of the menu. They might have a few items that include oil. But I don't know any place that's 100% oil free. Now I've been to conferences and events and even done catering for events in the whole food plant-based side that were no oil. So, you have 1,000 physicians in a room and they all need to eat, and we're doing this no oil whole food plant-based thing, and that's what all the food looks like, right? But that really means going into a hotel and working with the team, who's oftentimes very reluctant to do those sorts of things, and explaining to them they're going to go through an enormous amount of produce and it's just a much different take on those activities. I don't know, Rick, do you know of any places in Vegas or any places you've been to recently that are doing 100% no oil, or just kind of leaning that direction?
Not that I am aware of. The closest thing I could think of is I used to go to a place called Go Raw, which was basically oil free, but they weren't completely, because I know they had sesame oil, etc., in certain things. So not that I'm aware of, to be perfectly honest with you. It's an interesting topic to keep an eye on, but to be honest with you, as I said here, I can't give you any answers to what I've realized.
Yep. Absolutely. Next question here. I heard on one of the past live events that garlic shouldn't sit in olive oil. Did I hear that correctly? Does it mean I shouldn't infuse oils with it? If no, why? I see oils with garlic pieces sold in them in local stores. So yeah, Jerry, this is getting into a little bit of food science geekery. I would say, generally you're probably okay doing an infusion of garlic or herbs in oil. The risk comes with something like garlic and oil, comes in because there's a very small risk of botulism that can come in that anaerobic environment, that's submerged in oil. So I would say it's a low risk, but it's a risk that, because botulism can kill you, is a risk that some food service establishments and some food codes still stick by. I would say it's increasingly rare, but certainly in the 70s and 80s, when I think a lot of people were putting olive oil with garlic, and that was what was on the table, or you'd see it everywhere. There may have been a few outbreaks or a few issues with that. So otherwise, I would say it's not the most unsafe thing you're going to do in your kitchen, but it's not completely risk-free either. If it were up to me, I'd probably do it. I just want to be really mindful of the way you're processing the product and the way you're handling, and just being really aware of that would be important. Yep. Rick, do you want to add anything more about the oil and garlic question?
Yeah, just to add one thing, I think temperature is an important part of this discussion. Leaving oil out at room temperature that has garlic in it is going to accelerate your chances of botulism, or because especially whole cloves of garlic. They look beautiful, sitting in the olive oil on the shelf, and you got a warm environment going on, you're going to accelerate your chances of problems. You can put it in a refrigerator, let it be slow. You do sun teas, you do cold brews, do a cold infusion of garlic and olive oil, and it'll safeguard you from. Nothing's perfect in this world. I mean, if it looks something's a little funny going on there, get away from it. But in the refrigerator, not left there for months, I think you'd be much better off.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Next question from Gregory here: how to get others to eat healthier? Well, gosh, I think it starts, Gregory, with setting an example, number one. So I think people are more apt to do it if you're walking the walk, not just talking the talk. So I think that setting an example, being a role model, is a really great way. Other than that, I really start with meeting people where they are. It's I take the baby step approach. I do know some people who go in, knee deep, kind of all in style, but most people kind of tiptoe their way in. They want to test the waters. They want to experiment. They want to feel it. They want to kind of reevaluate. So for me, a lot of my approach is just, hey, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 things you can do in the next week that are going to be better choices? And then the week later, maybe you can normalize some of those things and they become the thing you do versus the thing you think about doing. And over time, as you accumulate more, better approaches or better decision making, you're going to be in a different position. So I think, those are some of the suggestions. I think that one approach that tends to turn people off is the conversation that makes people feel guilty or reinforces, negative food behaviors or fear of food. So it's important that in these conversations, in these interactions, that people feel really empowered that they're doing this for themselves, that no one's imposing this from the outside, but that they're making their own self-directed choice there. Rick, do you have anything to add on that healthy eating question? I know that
Sure.
Probably your experience in restaurants, cooking restaurant food, you always get those requests for people who want it a little bit different, a little bit healthier. But what's your take on that?
Well, if you're going to go to a restaurant that has healthy food that you enjoy, that's pretty simple. But if cooking at home, you want to eat healthier. The word healthier can mean so many things, so I'm not going to assume that. Let's just, for an example, say I'm going to eat nothing but vegetables and protein. I'm not going to have carbohydrates. I'm going to eliminate sugars. I'm not going to have anything that's processed in my diet. How you can do that? On a day-to-day basis, it becomes a drudgery. You're going to have days that you just don't know. So get your inspiration. Go to the store, buy a bunch of vegetables and meats or fish or whatever. I'm going down the path of the protein and veg example. Cook it all in a day. Cook it. Make planovers. Make it easy for yourself. Cook a lot of. If you're gonna fight, to me, I'm always going on to the grill, but that's my go-to. Barbecue, grill, smoke, flavor, right? So I'll do it all on a Sunday. I'll marinate. I'll have casserole pans filled with all kinds of things. The grill's on, the fire's burning, the wood is smoking. I'm gonna just start cooking everything, and I put it away. Things that last. This is the style that I like. So now, no matter when you get a craving, no matter what you want, that's what's available. Pack your refrigerator with the foods that you want to eat. And generally speaking, you could probably eat as much as you want and be better off in the long run because your body is appreciating the level of healthy style of eating that you've created yourself. So just make it easy. We're humans every single day trying to eat healthy. What a pain in the butt. But plan it. That's what you got. Get rid of all the chips, throw them out, feed them to the dog, do what you have to do, fill up the refrigerator with the stuff you want to eat, and guess what? Bam, you're eating healthier. That's my input.
I love it. Yeah, I think that the behavior change piece is really key. The idea of batch cooking on a Sunday is definitely something we've talked a lot about here on Ruby. It's one of the things that I've been doing for a long time, 25 years, and it's how I'm able to still cook most days, but not make it feel like it's drudgery. So I can spend a few hours one day a week And then the other days, it might only be 30 or 40 minutes of actual cooking because I'm just assembling things or putting things together. So I love the idea, Rick, of doing the batching, and you've got this energy, this momentum, this excitement around what you're doing on that one day, and you can produce a huge amount of food. So I'm still, in that mode of like, hey, on Sundays or Saturdays, I'm going to roast, sweet potatoes, some vegetables. I'm going to roast a sheet pan full of cauliflower. I'm going to make 2 different bean dishes. I'm going to freeze some. I'm going to, so you're basically setting yourself up so that when you go into Monday, you're looking at the fridge going, wow, I can't wait to rifle through all this stuff and get, start eating it. It becomes more exciting because you're not working so hard for that dinner. But that's the way I think it's about planning and process. If you're hungry and constantly scratching, it's going to make your mindset and the ability to actually be healthier a lot harder. So no one's making good choices when they're super hungry. Next question here. Can you create creamy sauce, desserts, and other recipes with nuts other than cashew? Yeah, you sure can. Other nuts that I like to use for the creamy factor would be pine nuts and macadamia nuts. They both require soaking and they both require a high-speed blender. I will say that cashews are exceptional for that texture component. They tend to really break down and create a softness and a really silky type texture, which you can achieve with those other nuts, but I think cashews are particularly well suited for it. Next question. How would you recommend getting a stage at a restaurant like Noma, the French Laundry, Per Se, etc.? Doesn't matter where you staged for the first time. Rick, I'm going to let you take that one about staging in top restaurants.
Wow. You want the real answer, I guess, huh? Well, first of all, the most important thing that you could bring to any interview, you have to get an interview. You have to get in front of somebody. You have to get your foot in the door. But once you're there, is your interest in learning and your burning desire to learn. That's all you have to bring. On skill levels, everything else, that's what a stage is about. That's where you develop those. But to get into the French Laundry Per Se, it's almost a little nepotism, recommendation, people. See if there's somebody in there that someone to throw you in front of so many resumes, etc., can be filtered through these establishments because they're well respected and everybody wants to get the name on their resume, etc. But all you really have to do is have a real, honest, burning desire to learn and do whatever it takes to accomplish the knowledge of the establishment that you're going towards getting a job in out of respect. These are things that somehow have diminished a little bit over the years, generally speaking. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. But how do you get into those restaurants? Ambition. Show your ambition. Be excited. Don't go into this isn't your interview. You're in there. I'll show you. I'm happy to do it. I'll work for free. Whatever. Well, stage. You're already saying you're working for free. But be available. Don't say, no, I can't work Tuesdays and Thursdays, though, because no. Whatever it is, yes, chef, go. Do it. That's the old school way of getting in the door, and I think it still works. That key still opens the door. So that's probably the best thing I could do for you, Jonathan. And in this world of bombardment and reopening of restaurants and stuff, it's probably a little bit more difficult. But don't give up. It's a good way to start. It doesn't matter for the first time. What matters is you're in a restaurant that cares about their food, makes things from scratch, and orders quality ingredients. Those are the 3 primary factors that I think are good selections for a first-time stage. I don't know what your feelings are, Ken, but that's from my perspective. Growing up in the olden days, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I would generally agree, Rick. I think that when you think about those upper echelon type places, a lot of other things go into the selection of the stage in those places. And I would also just say that while those places are amazing and they're going to produce world-class food, there's thousands of other kitchens where you're going to have an experience where you're also producing world-class food. And the real thing around a stage is you want to make sure that you're supported, right? You're there to learn, you're there to participate and contribute. But ultimately, is this a place that you want to be? Is this the sort of place you want to be? And my own personal perspective is that not everyone is cut out to work in these sorts of places, and not everyone should work in these places. And there's lots of other great places to work and contribute. So I don't want people to get too hung up on, those top tier, those kind of super ultra fine dining type places, because certainly that represents something, but I don't want that to cloud people's vision in terms of all the different types of quality restaurants and establishments that have thousands of people we've never heard of working every day producing amazing product. And that's the environment that ultimately you want to be in versus just having a name. The name's great, don't get me wrong. It can certainly help open up some other doors for you, but the experience that you have, to Rick's point, working with exceptional ingredients in a scratch kitchen where you get to do a lot of different things and not just repeat the same thing, is going to be the best type of environment. Next question here. I'm making shakshuka. My tomato sauce is fine, but I'm having issues with the raw eggs, adding the raw eggs to the sauce. I make divots in the sauce and add the eggs, but the whites take a long time to cook and the yolks get overcooked. Can you advise? So, one thing here with the shakshuka, Julie, is I recommend, maybe altering the style that you're using in terms of cooking. So if you're on a stovetop, you might go into an oven, which is going to have surround heat, conductive heat surrounding the food. It might give you just a more even cooking experience. You might also experiment with a lid or a partial lid. I'm not sure if you're doing that yet or not, but the lid will also keep some of that heat in. Essentially, the issue with, this sort of a cooking technique is that you've got simmering and a lot of this heat coming from the bottom, but you don't have any heat on the top to get the yolk or the whites cooked from the top down versus just the bottom up. And the yolks and the whites, eggs generally are sort of insulating, right? They kind of sit on top, and there's a barrier that gets created that you have to kind of get through to get the heat to transfer. So I would just, try those two recommendations in terms of partial cover or oven versus stovetop, and see where that takes you. My mom always tells me, don't cut up the fish yourself. You get it cut at the store. I prefer to cut it myself. Who do you guys agree with, me or my mom? Rick, who do you agree with? Where do you cut the fish?
Oh, Rubin. You're trying to cause problems here. I mean, what do you think? I love to cut my own fish. I enjoy it. I learn every time I put my hands on the beautiful fin fish that I'm filleting or pulling pin bones out or taking the skin off. How are you going to learn if you don't put your hands on it? Is the way I look at it. Now, people are afraid of fish in general. I can understand where your mom's coming from. She doesn't want to stink up the cutting board, their hands or whatever. I put on rubber gloves and I go at it because that's what I want to do. And I don't always put on rubber gloves. Sometimes I just wash my hands and cook it. I'm eating it myself and I'm feeding it to my wife. Doesn't matter. Get intimate with your food on any level that you possibly can. I'm raising chickens in my backyard right now. Oops, I hope the HOA doesn't hear. I mean, it's what you do that defines you and how close you want to get to your food. The more you can do with it, the better off you're going to be, and the better you're going to understand it. And you may find that, as you're pulling bones or doing something, that you learn how to make a stock out of the rack or the leftover bones with the head. You clean it, and that's always good to have too. There's always an added bonus, in my opinion. Put your hands on the product that you're going to be cooking and learn more about it. Ken, I don't know how you feel, but that's where my heart's at.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think that if this is your world that you want to be in, the food world, the more experience you have touching, handling, working with those products, the better off you're going to be. So I totally get where your mom's coming from. She's, to Rick's point, doesn't want the cutting board to smell like fish or whatever else, and I get that. But really, if this is going to be your world, you got to dive right in. You got to just get into it. You got to feel comfortable doing it. And ultimately, the more experience and the more time you have doing it, the faster you'll get, the better you'll be at discerning how fresh it is, what the best application is going to be, all those other things. It's just going to give you a better education overall. So, when you're cooking at your mom's house, you can let the fish cutter cut the fish. But when you're otherwise working on cooking, I would recommend that you have as much time as you possibly can handling, holding, and working with those different products.
Yeah, I agree. My kitchen smells too beefy anyway.
Next question coming in here. Hello, through the pro cooking course, there's a great emphasis on letting food rest, specifically meat and rice. I was wondering how this is applied in busy restaurants where time is so critical. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to just answer this real quick, but then pass to Rick, because he's got a lot more experience in the more recent memory, especially on the meat side. When it comes to the rice, typically you're going to be producing rice and grains and things like this, a number of times throughout service. So you're not just going to have rice made to order. That's going to take a lot of time. And you're not going to make rice once at 5 o'clock and expect that it lasts for the next, 4, 5, 6 hours. So typically you're going to have, a schedule. You have rice for opening, you have rice coming out an hour later, and, sitting hot and sitting covered, rice is perfectly fine to be served. Most applications in that kind of time frame. You don't want to let it sit too long, but you also don't want to make it to order. When it comes to meat and resting, Rick, I'll pass that one to you to give the insider's view of how it's done in a real working kitchen when you've got to pull a piece of meat off the grill and let it sit for a few minutes. What's the deal with timing?
All right. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. This is restaurant magic. What they do is they time it. That's what an appetizer section's for, a cocktail, the early massage in your dining experience. The restaurant is firing your steak just before you put your fork into the Caesar salad. A good restaurant will know the proper timing of your dinner to give you the ultimate in experience. And it's so important that, that the meat that you cook with at home, especially, is room temperature, because you can't have meat at room temperature nor have the time to bring a piece of meat up to room temperature. I don't care what anybody tells you. I'll tell you all day long, all right, this is what you do to have the best steak. Make sure you let it sit at room temperature for a good half hour. Who's got a half hour in the kitchen? Nobody. So that's the one rule that's generally broken. So the least you could do as a restaurant with integrity is to let the meat rest. So you usually have a sheet pan with a rack on it. You'll pre-cook, you'll sear off, you'll caramelize, you'll get to as close to the cooking temperature as you need, and then you'll let it rest. A good piece of meat takes at least 10 minutes to a roast, which needs 45 minutes to an hour in many cases, so that the juices get a chance to reintroduce themselves with equilibrium throughout the muscle. And that's just the way it's done. Appetizers, cocktails, pre-gaming, and timing properly. That's how the game is played in a high quality restaurant.
Yeah, you're right. Timing is everything when it comes to that. It's one of those things where I just think back to when I was a working chef. That was one of the major stress points, was making sure that when you had a big table with a complex set of orders, where some people have salads and some don't, and some have this and that, you want to make sure you can time it so that those big ticket items, roasted meats or steaks or half a roasted chicken or whatever it is, are coming off and have that 8, 10, 12 minutes or more to sit before you slice into it. Because obviously what you don't want to do is to have to repeat the whole thing, right? You bring it out to the customer and your guest goes, what the heck? This thing is all over the place. And then you have a different problem because you're just going to press that repeat button at that point. But certainly I think that the overall attention to timing and the ability for individuals who are, really hoping to have that experience, they're going to a place that does it all the time, and they've kind of figured it out. It's not their first time balancing those different components, right? Next question coming from Gerald. I'm considering taking the next plant-based class after this one. Since it is more time and cost, I'm wondering how the class is different from this one. Can you briefly compare and contrast? Gerald, rather than doing this on the live event, the best thing that you can do is actually just go to the website for the professional plant-based certification course. It actually has the entire syllabus listed on the website. So if you want to pull up that syllabus, you can actually compare it directly to the course you're in currently and get a completely 100% accurate visual depiction of how they differ in terms of scope and length and the sorts of things that you'll be cooking. So hopefully you can do that, Gerald, as a starting point. Otherwise, if you contact our student services team, studentservices@rouxbe.com or support@rouxbe.com, one of our awesome student services support reps can help you in terms of understanding the differences with those programs for sure. Next question, anything you can cook that is similar to a scrambled egg? This is coming from Gerald. Gerald, I'm assuming you're wanting a plant-based scrambled egg, and my go-to in that scenario is tofu. And what I typically do is buy firm tofu. I will I'll drain it out of the package because it comes in water, and I will wrap it in plastic and I'll put it in the freezer, and then I'll pull that out and I'll essentially crumble or break apart that thawed but previously frozen tofu. I find that the texture of the tofu after freezing is just a little bit better for working in that kind of scrambled egg type context. But what I do is I add some black salt. So it's a salt that is got a little bit of a sulfuric type flavor profile. So it resembles the kind of faint aroma of what an egg yolk when it cooks smells like. So just a tiny bit of black salt, some turmeric, and otherwise, really load up on the aromatics. And you can make a really great kind of veggie egg, quote unquote, egg scramble using tofu, the turmeric, the black salt, maybe some onions and garlic or shallots, just to add that kind of allium component to your scramble. But that makes a great eggless scrambled egg type dish. Certainly works great as a filling in anything in there as well. Rick, do you want to add anything to that scrambled egg, tofu scrambled egg question?
I look up to you as the tofu king. I'm not even pretending. But when you brought up black salt, you're talking about the black mineral salt from India?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, well, see, because that's brilliant. That is so brilliant. Because it has that sulfur connectedness. There's something that is just so eggy about black salt, but you have to make sure you're getting the proper thing. It's pink, actually. It's not black at all, and it's sometimes clumpy, and you have to like put it through a sieve or something and powder it out. It's very powerful. It's definitely salty. It adds such an incredibly intriguing flavor to, deviled eggs. If you're making deviled eggs, sorry, that's a whole nother category. But in this instance, it's definitely going to take that tofu and mess with your mind and make you think you're sure eating some of the best eggs you ever had in your life. I just wanted to clarify that was the black salt from India, which isn't really salt.
Exactly. Yeah, the Indian black salt, which can range, like you said, range in color from kind of a pale amber or pink to a brown or even darker sometimes. But it's the smell of that salt with the sulfur that makes it unique in this egg replacement type application.
Brilliant.
Really fun. People always freak out because it does have that eggy flavor that people are used to that they don't even really recognize as eggy, but it has a very faint sulfur type smell to it.
Yep.
Next question here. I want to purchase an 8-inch omelet pan. Can you comment on the properties of a stainless steel nonstick fry pan versus an aluminum nonstick fry pan? So, Julie, this is an easy answer. Stainless is going to provide a better surface overall. Even though you have a nonstick interior, you're not worried about aluminum contamination. The heavier the pan, the better typically. So the more evenly it'll heat, the better it'll retain heat, and you'll get a lot more even cooking experience with less hot spots and things like that. So anytime you're purchasing a pan that has a nonstick coating, I would always go for the stainless steel version. The other benefit of stainless steel in most cases is that they're also induction burner ready, which is something to think of if you're ever using induction or using your pan somewhere else. Aluminum will never be induction ready. Next question from Jen. Can you direct us to a resource to store vegetables? Which ones to refrigerate? What types of storage containers? How should we store non-refrigerated vegetables and for how long? Rick, I'm going to pass that one over to you to talk about vegetable storage a bit.
Okay, well, I have vegetables all over my house. from in my pantry area, which is just it's a wicker basket lined with a cloth, and that's where I keep my onions, my garlic, my spaghetti squash, my potatoes, and then sometimes I'll throw in an apple there because the gas that comes out of the apple keeps potatoes from sprouting if you're keeping them for a long period of time. And that's usually fine at the ambient temperature of your home. And I put them in my pantry because it's darker and it's cooler. It's away from the kitchen. Refrigerating vegetables, I like to take, again, I don't like vegetables to steam too much in their own bags, etc. So I'll take them out and I'll just let them loosely be in my vegetable bin in my refrigerator, keeping it dry. If any moisture accumulates on the bottom, make sure you dry it, or put a cloth down on there or something so you can just change it out. This will extend the time, the shelf life, and the quality of your vegetables in general. I mean, good God, there's thousands of vegetables. I couldn't go through them all right now. But herbs, this is something I just want to pass on to you that I find. Like herbs like cilantro, I'll cut the base of it, put them in a cup, and I'll just put them in my refrigerator with a little water on them. They last for twice as long as normal if you just keep them in a bag, because they just rot. But thyme, you get fresh thyme. You put them into a mason jar, cover it, no water in the bottom, and keep it in the fridge. It lasts for weeks. I've got sage, same way, weeks. You'd be surprised just by putting herbs into a mason jar, covering it and refrigerating that way. They last for a very, very, very long period of time. They're not getting pushed around. They're not getting bruised. And oftentimes you don't have to put water on the bottom. But when it's a crunchy, leafy, soft, tender thing like parsley, chervil, or cilantro, you want to kind of like treat them like a fresh cut flower, but keep them in your refrigerator. What else is there? That's about it. I mean, I have a friend of mine that has an old wine container to hold wine, and he doesn't have it filled with wine. He stores his vegetables in those. I just think it's brilliant, because you don't have to have your vegetables as cold as a typical refrigerator is set. It's not necessary. That's not where they grow in. That's not how you need to hold them. So, and as far as peppers that are starting to get spots on them, I grill them right away. I just cook them. I'll preserve them. I'll put them up. I'll pickle them. I don't let anything go bad. Nothing's going bad at the Moonen house. Shouldn't in yours either. So I hope that helped you a little bit, Jen, with how to play around. Keep things dry. It's normally the way to roll, unless, of course, it's an herb.
Yeah, I love that idea. Keeping things dry is really important with lettuces and leafy greens. I always take them out and put a towel or a paper towel around them, just so you get that excess moisture. You want to make sure you have some airflow. The mason jar example is also great. I think that I discovered that maybe 15 or 18 years ago. I had a friend who used to do that, and I used to poke fun at her. And then I realized that, well, she was right. And it was mostly just because of the fact they weren't getting pushed around or banged or stuffed in a bag or something was on top of them. So it's just a lot more delicate way to handle them. It was almost just like putting them in their own little bubble. So it wasn't a matter of temperature or humidity. It was just a matter of them not being smashed around. That was a pretty important thing. Great comment there. Next question we have here: how much butter should I use for eggs? I usually use a half a tablespoon and have to spend 10 minutes cleaning my pan. Please help me. That seems about right. I don't know that that's an excessive amount of butter. I would say that if you use much more, you're maybe not going to have incorporation of the fat into the eggs as they're cooking, or if you're scrambling. But otherwise, you just want enough oil so things aren't sticking. You might, if you're spending a lot of time cleaning your pan, you might check your cooking temperature, and also just make sure it's the right pan to be making those eggs in. It doesn't seem like you're using too much or too little. That seems like an appropriate amount of butter for sure.
No, it's not. I love butter with my eggs. See, if I can teach you how to clean that pan in 5 minutes. Give me a call. I got you down. No, seriously. When you're cleaning eggs that are cooked and stuck onto something, soak them in cold water. Cold water, not hot water. Hot water will set them even firmer and make it even harder to clean them. Cover with cold water, and then just a little bit of my dad called it elbow grease. It comes right on. So,
beautiful. Yeah. Next question: what's the best way to store peppers, habaneros, serrano, etc.? If they start to show signs of going bad, how can they be preserved? Can they be frozen? You just suggest dehydrating them. Yes, certainly you can chop them and freeze them. You can process them into a salsa or a sauce or a chili paste, and that can be frozen. You can pickle them, right? So you can either do an old style lacto fermented style pickle with just a salt brine or 2 or 3% salt brine solution, or you could do a vinegar based, acid based pickle. But yeah, there's lots of things you can do. I love Rick's attitude about not letting stuff go to waste and always finding some creative things. So what are some of the things, Rick, that you do with your chili peppers when they begin to get soft or spotty?
Oh, well, first of all, Thai chili peppers I keep in the freezer. Period. Done. They're perfect. I think they're just as, I mean, right next to the ginger, just in case you don't have ginger and you need it in a pinch. Stuff in the freezer is fantastic. But peppers, like I said before, is like I like to grill them a lot. I mean, I'll tend to grill a mix of peppers and just put it all together and have it put in a jar, and it extends the shelf life considerably, not indefinitely, but as long as it's in the refrigerator, it lasts a pretty long time. And a lot of times on the very small ones, serranos, etc., I'll leave the seeds in them. I don't care. Just you deal with the heat level when you just taste it before and you find out how much of it to use. Like back earlier, we were talking about how much to add, how much sugar to add, etc. It's a lot of these things are taste, and a lot of these things are chemistry. But when it comes to peppers and keeping them from going bad, just watching them, die their slow death in your refrigerator, take them out and do something with them. I love the idea of pickling them. I mean, that's probably my number one way. And one way I'll do it as well is just make like a nuke chum, preserve it in fish sauce and lemon and lime juice and garlic and chop your peppers really fine, put them in there. It doesn't have to be a Thai chili. It just needs to have a certain level of Scoville units because when you're working with aggressive ingredients like fish sauce, at the end of the day, it's just carrying the heat. It's carrying the level of the residual, beautiful chili pepper heat on your palate. So I and it lasts for I don't know. I guess I would have to tell you it's good for 2 weeks, and 2 months later I'm eating it. So you tell me what you think. I just preserve it, pickle it, delicious.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my go-tos for pickling chilies is like escabeche, which is a vinegar-based pickle. But I do an escabeche pickle that's cauliflower, onion, garlic, carrot, and then whatever green chilies I have. So serranos, jalapenos, most typically. But those things are great. And my escabeche, I'll have it, very, very chunky, so very rough cut. My jalapenos are cut in half. My cauliflower in fairly large florets. And when I do it every year, and I always have multiple jars. But what I typically do when I'm getting to this point in the season where I have some escabeche and I know I'm going to be making some more here in just a matter of weeks, I'll take my very chunky escabeche and I'll puree it. I'll make a paste, and I'll use that kind of acidified, very spicy chili vegetable paste as a thing I'll add onto grilled meats. I'll use it as a sauce on pita bread, making like with falafel. I mean, there's just 1,000 uses for this kind of pale green, beautiful paste that's not super fiery, but it has enough chili heat in it, but also has the benefit of having the cauliflower and the onion and other components. So it just becomes this really fun, amazing flavor booster.
Right.
But if you want to dehydrate, that's also great. There's nothing wrong with dehydrating. Just know that if it's a green chili and you dehydrate, you're not going to really do a good job of maintaining that color. The chlorophyll tends to brown out and become pretty muted, whereas the red colors that you have are going to be a lot more vibrant. So just a little heads up on that. People sometimes they have dehydrated chilies and they're expecting these beautiful green. Nah, they're going to change color on you a bit. So next question I'll leave to Rick. When making burgers, it is okay to leave the center of the patty a little pink. Rick, what do you think?
Absolutely. I don't see any. Okay, first of all, I'm just thinking of the last couple of days. I'm reading on the social media 400,000 pounds of beef were recalled for E. coli. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. You make my point is know the quality and the source of the meat that you're cooking pink in the middle before I blanket statement that it's okay. I think it's perfectly okay, especially if you're eating a leaner cut of meat. You want it to have more of a pink center to it, or you're going to be gagging it down. It's going to stay in your throat because it gets so dry. It's tough to eat. So I mean, if you got a higher fat content, you could cook it further. I would say. I had a Wagyu playing around with it the other day. I was making a hamburger, and so I cooked it through with cheese on it, but it was Wagyu, and the next day it was amazing. Just to reheat. So pink in the middle, absolutely recommended, especially if it's lean, knowing your source, and if you're consuming it right away. Those are the safety factors that I must tell you about. But I'll eat a hamburger medium rare if I know the meat with the source of that meat and how it was handled. Because of course I do, because I'm the one cooking it. So those are the parameters of what I can suggest as far as how you eat the center of your hamburger. I mean, a force meat or a hamburger or something that has gone through a grinder tends to have a bacterial exposure concern that's higher than a whole piece of a whole cut, a whole muscle. But that being said, it's one of the favorite things consumed in America. Know where you're getting it from. Trust that it's been handled and temperature controlled properly, and you can eat it any darn way you want. Ken, you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think if you're going to eat a burger and you're worried about your safety, certainly cooking it more versus less would be a safer way to go. But if you're looking for palatability or texture or moisture, less temperature, less heat, especially when you know the source of the product is going to be acceptable for sure. I think it's one of those things, Rick, where people sort of walk the tightrope, right? They want to have their burger, they want to have it a certain way, but they also know that there's, depending on the way you're getting your meat, there's potentially processing concerns around safety and things like that. But generally you're cooking it to a certain internal temperature anyway, even if it's only 130 or 135, and that's better than raw consumption for sure in any event. Next question here: is there a guide somewhere that lists the different types of flour and what they are best used for? Gosh, Jerry, I don't know of such a guide. I bet you that companies that produce flour, like Bob's Red Mill or King Arthur and similar brands, I bet you they have a guide. I bet you they have something that is a introduction to different kinds of flour that gives just an overview of the certain applications. For me, the two big buckets are really going to be kind of gluten-containing flours, and then the entire world now of gluten-free flours or flour blends, which can really be anything. It could be a variety of different nuts or that are ground down into flour, like almonds and things like that. It could be things like sorghum. It could be rice flour. It could be really any number of things, teff flour. So the idea here would be to kind of break it down so you have a list of the gluten containing versus non-gluten containing, mostly because they're going to act very, very differently in terms of working in baked goods, in particular in bread. Next question, or last question, I should say. It's for both of us. What was the first thing you ever cooked? Question mark. The first thing for Rubin was eggs. So Rick, what was the first thing you ever cooked? Do you remember what that was?
I can't recall the very first thing I ever cooked, but I was definitely into the science of making bread. I thought it was amazing. I remember the Betty Crocker's cookbook and cooking out of that, making cookies. So I don't know if cookies came before bread before cookies. Keep in mind, I was considered a husky child, and I ate everything, and I ate everything. That's how I got the set of references I have today. I lost some weight. But eggs were up there too, but it wasn't the first thing I ever cooked. That came on later on. It was definitely baking. My mom kept me in the kitchen a lot because I was hyperactive, and I was probably going to be disassembling the television with a screwdriver I found if I wasn't next to her. So she kept me stirring things and doing things. But on my own, I know it was bread. I remember distinctly making bread as a young child and eating it. It was the best part. Ken, what was the first thing you cooked?
Gosh, I can't remember the first thing I cooked. I have a lot of memories cooking as a young person. I started cooking when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I got a knife when I was about 9 years old, and I always tell the story about how I catered my own bar mitzvah when I was 13, which was an amazing event. Just to organize and coordinate and do all those things as a 13-year-old. My brain was definitely in the food space already. But yeah, I guess my first thing was probably something that my mom was already making. My mom is an amazing cook. Growing up, we ate just amazing food. She grew up on a farm, so we ate great stuff. One of the recipes I remember as an early kind of recipe development mode I was in. I was probably 9 years old, I want to say, and I was literally just in the family garden pulling things out of the garden. My mom always grew peppers, eggplant, and tomatoes, and I remember making a sauce with those, with very, very long fusilli noodles, kind of those long corkscrew type fusilli noodles. And I remember that being a dish that I made. And I remember for myself, my mental note was always about the eggplant. It was the one vegetable in there that you had to make sure was really soft, because otherwise it was just not good, right? You could do a little crunchy pepper, or you could do whatever, but if eggplant was undercooked, not something that people wanted. So that was an early memory and early lesson for me, for sure. Awesome. That looks like all the questions we have today. What's that, Rick?
Nah, not all things are success stories too. Not one of the first things I cooked, I wanted to make a cake from scratch, so I followed the recipe along with my brother. I don't know where we went wrong. It was so bad though. Before anybody came home, my mom from work, etc., my brother and I had buried it in the backyard. So just keep in mind, your childhood memories are not all success stories out of your backyard. I picked the rice and then I cured it that morning, and then I dried it, and then I cooked it that night and made risotto. It didn't happen. Anyway, that is all the questions we have today. I just want to leave you with, it's not all success. A lot of experiment and curiosity and love for cuisine.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. This was a lot of fun, and we're looking forward to the next live event that Rick and I will be hosting. Until next time, we look forward to seeing you in class, and happy cooking. Be well.
Bye now. Thank you.